Right now, you are nice and warm. And you didn't even have to try. Heating just runs. There is a jacket by your door you didn't have to hunt to make. Plus, there is food in your kitchen that will still be there next week, regardless of how cold it gets outside. Now, strip all of that away. Imagine your bare skin and a winter so bitter it could freeze you in your sleep before you ever woke up. That used to be normal. Not for just one bad season, but hundreds of thousands of years. Your ancestors survived through massive ice ages, where towering sheets of ice blanketed whole continents, and freezing weather could kill a human in mere hours. Yet somehow, they made it. You are the proof. Every one of them lived long enough to pass life down to you, meaning every last one of them won a battle against winter they could not afford to lose. So, how did they pull it off? How does a soft, hairless creature that evolved in the warm African sun survive the worst weather this planet has ever thrown at us? That is what I want to share, because it's one of the greatest survival stories we have. And almost nobody realizes how close we came to not making it at all. Let's be honest about what they were up against. Because winter makes it sound like a chilly afternoon and a cozy fire. It was nothing like that. The last ice age peaked roughly 26 to 19,000 years ago. Ice sat heavy on Europe, Asia, and North America. The ground was flat, frozen, and wide open, with nothing to block the wind. Trees were hard to find. Food simply vanished for months on end. And humans just aren't designed for that. We come from warm places, and our bodies still show it. We don't have thick fur. We don't have a thick layer of blubber. And we can't slow our heart rate to sleep through the winter like a bear. Take a person's clothes off in bone-chilling cold. You have hours, not days. Soon your body shuts down. And that is it. Yet, the animals around them were built for the freeze. Mammoths had thick fur and fat. Cave bears could hibernate. Reindeer could just walk away to somewhere much warmer. Humans had absolutely none of that. On paper, we should have been some of the first things to die when the freeze came. Wrong body, wrong place, and the absolute worst timing. But we had a brain that could plan, and nimble hands that could build the things our weak bodies lacked. That turned out to be enough, just barely. There was no single trick that saved us. It was a whole stack of life hacks, and each solved a deadly challenge that would have killed them. Here is how they actually pulled it off. It all started with fire. Nothing works without it, so that is where we begin. Humans had already been using fire for a very long time, roughly 300 to 400,000 years. By the Ice Age, fire was not some nice luxury. It was survival itself, and they were masters of it. Archaeologists digging up ice age hearths over in Ukraine expected to uncover simple, messy fires. Instead, they found sophisticated, engineered fireplaces, and one of them burned above 600 degrees Celsius. That is 1100 degrees Fahrenheit. When wood ran scarce out on the windy plains, they burned animal fat and bones instead. Fire gave them warmth, cooked their food, hardened their hunting tools, and provided hours of light when the winter sun barely rose. Then they learned how to carry warmth with them. The trouble with fire is you can't take it everywhere. Walk away from it, and the freezing cold is right there. So, humans did something that no other animal could do. They literally stole the warmth off other animals and put it right on themselves. At first, it was simple, just skins thrown over their shoulders. And here is a crazy fact. People were skinning bears for their fur in Northern Europe at least 300,000 years ago. We know this from microscopic cut marks left on fossilized bear paw bones right where you would slice to peel a pelt off clean. Those bear hides made great wine and waterproof winter cloaks. But loose skins leak critical heat through every single gap. That is not enough to survive a brutal ice age. The fix arrived about 30,000 years ago. And it is so tiny it sounds almost silly, the sewing needle. A simple sliver of bone or ivory with a microscopic hole punched through it. One expert even called it perhaps the most revolutionary design in human history. And honestly, they have a point. It meant you could tailor clothes with perfectly sealed seams, warm layers, sleeves tight at the wrist. Draping a blanket over your shoulders and a tailored coat are two completely different things. That tiny needle bridged the gap between them. Our early ancestors may have worn much warmer gear than Neanderthals did. This simple design trick might have saved our species from extinction. And they did not stop at fur. Deer skin blocked frozen winds yet stayed soft enough for warm mittens and waterproof boots. Plus, Before venturing out into the freeze, hunters smeared heavy animal fat called tallow all over their exposed skin. It sealed the skin, trapped body heat, and blocked frozen winds from stealing warmth away. A bit gross, sure, but it worked. Out across the blinding snow, there lurked another hazard we often forget about snow blindness. That intense glare off the drifts can completely blind you. So, hunters carved narrow slits into bone or wood, then strapped them over their eyes. Those tiny slits blocked out most of the glare. The world's first sunglasses, built entirely of bone. We always picture cavemen shivering inside dark caves, but the truth is far cooler than that. Our resourceful ancestors actually built their own specialized homes right on the frozen tundra. Out in modern-day Ukraine and Russia, there were zero caves and barely any wood. So, they grabbed the one thing lying around everywhere: mammoth bones. At a site called Mazirik, people uncovered circular homes built almost entirely from mammoth bones and tusks. Heavy skulls and leg bones went into the ground for foundations. Then ribs and tusks arched up to form the frame. Imagine hundreds of bones in just one home. They were anchored deep in the dirt and packed with hides, moss, and soil, trapping the warm air well enough to keep an entire family cozy. The biggest one is 18,000 years old, built right in the brutal freezing ice age. And this prehistoric site was used over and over for hundreds of years. That is some of the earliest architecture ever discovered. Imagine building homes from giants. Their design was clever in ways you would never guess. These winter shelters featured a cold trap entryway, with the entrance dug lower than the sleeping space. Since cold air is heavy, it sank into that entry and pooled there, while the warm air floated up to where the family slept. They figured this science out tens of thousands of years before anyone ever wrote down the physics. They also used snow, which sounds crazy until you understand it. Snow is an amazing insulator. Pile massive banks of it around a shelter and the interior stays near freezing, even when the air outside drops to 30 below. Generations before anyone perfected the igloo, humans already knew that beneath a snowbank was much warmer than now in the freezing air above. Where you settled mattered, too. Forest dwellers had it easier than those out in the open, because a stand of trees blocks a massive amount of wind. Strolling through the woods on a freezing day is surprisingly calm compared to freezing in an open field. And for those drafty gaps where we would spray foam, they packed in thick moss, wet mud, and sticky pine pitch. Yes, that gooey tree sap was used to glue everything shut tight, because staying warm meant staying alive. But the slow killer in winter was hunger. For months, there was absolutely nothing to forage, and barely anything to hunt. So, they mastered the art of stockpiling food early. When they brought home a massive catch, they did not just feast, they preserved it. The bitter cold did half the work, freezing meat right on the spot to save it. They smoked the meat, dried it into jerky, and gathered wild berries to dry. They dug deep storage pits right into the frozen earth and built basic root cellars where nature kept things icy cold and safe until spring. Archaeologists even found evidence they weighed mammoth meat down and sank it in chilly ponds to keep it fresh. Talk about a prehistoric fridge. And none of this needed electricity or fancy machinery that could break. It could not just fail during a bad winter storm, and absolutely nothing went to waste. Every single part of the animal was used. Our ancestors were experts at extracting every last calorie from a carcass. Honestly, that is hard to imagine today. When we throw away nearly half of our groceries, their hunts were highly strategic, too. Over in eastern France, right near a towering limestone cliff, Ice Age tribes used fire and brilliant teamwork to herd entire groups of wild horses and reindeer into natural traps. Not just once, but for tens of thousands of years. At that exact same spot, over and over. Hunt big, dry the meat, and store it. That simple strategy is exactly how they managed to survive. But here is a detail that is easy to miss. Those ancient hunters fully expected winter. Their entire calendar revolved around prepping for it. Meanwhile, we are the ones who get totally blindsided. We just assume the electricity will magically turn back on. So when a severe blizzard strikes, we are shocked. No way. They were never surprised. Most of their year was spent preparing, and they relied on each other. Far more. People pack under one roof than we would ever tolerate in way less space. And that was totally intentional. Body heat is a real Warmth source, you pack enough people tightly together. Having a room to yourself was no luxury. It meant you were cold and exposed. It was usually those living all alone, especially the elderly, who died first in a sudden freeze because there was no one beside them to share their body heat. But that doesn't mean Ice Age groups were peaceful. Survival was a brutal struggle. Resources were scarce. And sometimes humans became the ultimate threat to others. We actually have proof that some early humans turned to cannibalism just to survive. When food got scarcer than a straight-shooting politician, these ancient people had no option but to resort to the absolute most extreme measures for survival. They also used livestock for heat. During the worst medieval winters across Europe, peasants actually brought their animals, like cows and sheep, right inside the ground floor of their homes. These beasts radiated an incredible amount of warmth, which drifted up, warming the family sleeping right above them. Imagine living directly on top of your heater. Only the heater was a cow. Sometimes the chill dug so deep that human bodies actually adapted. The Yagan people, at the southern tip of South America, survived freezing conditions wearing almost no clothes at all. To survive, their bodies ran hotter than ours, generating extra heat from within. They also rested in a deep squatting position, which tucked their limbs tight and slashed the amount of warmth they lost. Their shield against winter wasn't a jacket, it was just their own body turned up high. Then there is the absolute wildest idea of all. What if some of our early ancestors survived the freezing winter in a way that sounds totally made up by hibernating at a Spanish site known as the Pit of Bones? Researchers examine ancient human ancestors from roughly 430,000 years ago who lived during a brutal ice age. And those bones are bizarre. The damage on them shows up in predictable, seasonal cycles. Year after year, their bone growth stopped and started, proving they rarely ever saw the sun. Teenagers had completely disrupted growth. It is the exact same pattern seen in creatures that hibernate. When their entire system slows down, they stop eating and begin devouring their own tissue. The researchers hypothesized that these hominids, lacking any fatty food to survive a brutal freeze, might have crawled into dark caves and slowed their bodies down into a deep, comatose state to wait it out. It is highly debated. Many experts dismiss the idea, claiming there are other explanations for that skeletal wear. We cannot do this ourselves today. But the concept is so wild that serious researchers are still actively debating it. So, your relative sleeping through winter like theirs is not an idea we can easily brush off. Across hundreds of thousands of years, surviving until the spring was never guaranteed. Each freezing season was a challenge you could fail, and failure meant death. Here is what blows my mind. In just a few thousand years, a mere blip on our evolutionary timeline, humans went from building shelters out of mammoth bones to simply tapping a smart thermostat. The ultimate killer our ancestors feared is now a minor nuisance we gripe about while walking to a preheated car. We conquered the cold so thoroughly that most of us forgot it was ever a war. We were losing.